Here we are, living in the age of unfinished ideas. Everyone has a project, everyone has a concept or has a draft in progress, but very few people actually create anything that lives and breathes. We confuse brainstorming with building, we confuse aesthetic with depth, and even more dangerously, we confuse remixing with imagination. Welcome back to Literary Lenses. In this episode, we stick with the Romantic poets. We discussed Wordsworth at length in the last episode. Today we are looking at S.T. Coleridge. So 200 years ago, Coleridge saw this problem coming. The problem of mechanically adjusting stuff rather than creating anything new. And 200 years ago, he drew a line so sharp, so permanent, that it still defines creativity today. There is, according to Coleridge, there is a concept called fancy and there's a concept called imagination. Fancy rearranges, imagination transforms. So who was S.T. Coleridge? Most of us know him as William Wordsworth's friend, contemporary, great romantic poet. But he was not just Wordsworth's friend. He was the thinker behind the Romantic movement. While Wordsworth democratized poetry, Coleridge philosophized it, if that makes sense. Wordsworth was saying that poetry belongs to ordinary people. Coleridge said great poetry belongs to a deeper consciousness. What is that deeper consciousness? The human imagination at work. That is what great poetry belongs to. He wasn't describing what poets write, not at all. He was describing what makes a human creator in the first place. Before Coleridge, people thought poetry was just emotion or it just had ornamental value, right? Posh, high-class people read poetry, or it's just something that adds beauty to the language, something that is just ornamental in value, or just emotional. Coleridge said no, not at all. Creativity is a mental act. It's not a feeling, it's a power. It's not just decoration, it's transformation. So to explain the entire process, he ended up breaking imagination into two kinds. One was, and I'll get to those layers later, but as a concept, what fancy means is just mechanical assembling of different fragments together. Right? So that is what it meant when Coleridge mentioned it. So what fancy meant was mechanical assembling of fragments. What it means in today's world is AI, templates, remixed content. All of that is fancy. Whereas imagination, on the other hand, meant, according to Coleridge, the inner power that ends up generating meaning. What that means in today's world is human genius, lived insight. Those are things of real value. That's a part of imagination. And then he further broke imagination into two layers. One was primary imagination. That is the very act of perceiving the world. All of us do that. And then there was a secondary imagination, which is the act of reshaping reality into art. Right? So in other words, you don't imagine because you're a poet. You imagine because you're a human being. Right? And it can be something as normal as you get into a mall or you get into a parking lot and you realize that the cars have not been arranged or parked the right way. If those 5 cars were parked in a different way, we could have added 10 more cars to it. So now you're reimagining reality, right? So that is what he meant by imagination. Coleridge also gave us another masterstroke when he ended up differentiating between a symbol and allegory. So what is an allegory? An allegory points to an idea, while a symbol is the idea alive in a way. An allegory is artificial, a symbol is organic. Allegory could be reflected most easily when I use the phrase intellectual shorthand. A symbol, on the other hand, requires spiritual depth. This is why true literature breathes. It really does. It breathes. Think of Pride and Prejudice. Think of Hamlet. Think of any of Shakespeare's plays, to be honest. So true literature really breathes, while cheap content just replicates. Imitation. Actually different from imitation, replication. Coleridge, even in today's world, especially in today's world, where we are drowning in fancy. When I say drowning in fancy, a lack of original content. And let me give you a decent reference for it. So scrolling is fancy, trending aesthetics is fancy, remixing audio is fancy, AI art without human vision is fancy. Machines can recombine stuff, of course they can, but they cannot intend. They can output, but they cannot mean. They can generate form, but they can never soul. Right? And Coleridge predicted all of this and this divide, especially 200 years ago, when he was not even talking about technology. He could not imagine the technology that we have today. He said the imagination is a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. Let me translate that for you. The translation is, when you imagine, to imagine is to participate in creation itself. And today, like I said, these lessons from Coleridge are more vital than ever. We don't lack content. Often we just lack vision. We don't lack productivity. We lack inner life. We don't lack tools. We lack soul in the work, real soul. Creativity is what you make, isn't it? Creativity is what of yourself you put into the making. It's not just what you make. But how does your work convey you? What part of yourself have you put into the making, the creation of whatever you're ending up creating? For modern writers, business writers, content creators, key lessons, if you could take away from Coleridge, is if you want your work to live, stop remixing, stop borrowing. Stop borrowing content, stop borrowing style without wrestling with meaning. Wrestle with it. Give some of it to your work. Go beyond cleverness. Go into insight. Go beyond the idea. Go into transformation. Because fancy copies reality, imagination renews it completely. So here's the question Coleridge leaves us with. Are you assembling or are you imagining? Because like I said, the world has enough content. What it needs now is creation. Not trends, not replicas, not remixes. Creation that costs you something, that comes from the interior life. This is Coleridge, that is imagination, and that is the work worth doing. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.